Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are turning in from, and welcome everyone. This is Drisha's Boker Iyun, our Erev, some little bit of Torah for Erev Hanukkah. We are going to start things off this morning with Dr. Jon Kelsen, who will be teaching on the insights into Maimonides' Laws of Hanukkah. In this session, we'll examine some surprising features of Maimonides' masterful Laws of Hanukkah, paying especially close attention to its structure and its description of the miracle, which stands at the center of the holiday. Dr. Jon Kelsen is our Chief Education Officer at Drisha, and he formerly was Dean at YCT and Rosh Kollel of the Drisha Kollel. We are happy to have him teach always, and he is tuning in today from Jerusalem. Rabbi Kelsen, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be with everybody here. Give me one moment, please. Okay, so pleasure with everybody here. It is now Erev Hanukkah. It's Hanukkah Eve, and a fitting time opportunity to prepare for this day by spending some time with Maimonides. With Maimonides is always somebody who's good to spend some time with. You can't really go wrong with the Rambam. But especially when it comes to Hanukkah, it's especially appropriate to focus on the Rambam. And I see here that the focus on the Rambam, who in a sense created or perhaps crystallized Hilchot Hanukkah per se. Made Hilchot Hanukkah, as an entity in its own right. It's often noted, and Caleb, do you have the sources? Can you post them in the chat, please? I'm not going to screen share, but I think the sources came around by email for all those who registered, and we'll also post them in the chat, and so people can follow along. But I'll try to sort of signal to you when to look at which source. So the Rambam, as well known, the Rambam, in a sense, created Hilchot Chanukah. What I mean by that is in the Mishnah, Chanukah gets scant attention. It's mentioned here or there in the other contexts, somewhat parenthetically, but it's not a topic in its own right. There is no Masechet Chanukah, like there is a Masechet Megillah, for example. In the Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat, so there is already more of a substantial conversation, a substantial collection of material around Hanukkah, and we'll reference that in a few minutes. It's found. Anybody know where it's found? Otherwise, I'd be happy to be a bit, to learn with rather than talk at people here, as those of you who have learned from me before know. So feel free to, shoot over questions or thoughts. But the Laws of Hanukkah, or the collection of material of Hanukkah, is found in the Talmud Bavli in Masechet Shabbat, in the Tractate Shabbat, in the second chapter, which is about candle lighting primarily about candle lighting for Shabbos candles, for Shabbat candles. So it's not altogether surprising that the laws of Hanukkah candles, or Hanukkah, I should say more broadly, was redacted there. But again, it's not the primary topic in its own right. Certainly no, again, Masechet Chanukah. It's only but when we get to the Rambam, really, I think that the Rif already Al-Falsi gestures towards this, but it's only when you get really to the Rambam, I think that you have Hilchot Chanukah per se. So as such, it's appropriate to spend some time with the Rambam today with Maimonides as we prepare for Chanukah this evening for all on Chaf Hei Kislev. Now, Hanukkah actually, if you look at Maimonides, I say he sort of created his own, Hilchot Hanukkah, but it wasn't a self-standing halacha. It's actually paired with the Hilchot Megillah, the laws of Megillah, which deal with Purim. So therefore, we have Hilchot Megillah v'Hanukkah, which is a four-chapter text. The first two chapters are about Hilchot Megillah or Hilchot Purim, and the latter chapters are basically about Hilchot Hanukkah with a surprise edition there. And we're gonna be interested in trying to understand, among other things, from sort of the broader structural perspective, what do we make of this construction of not even Hilchot Hanukkah per se as much as Hilchot Megillah v'Hanukkah? It's, by the way, it's interesting that he calls it Hilchot, Megillah, not Hilchot Purim. I suppose that's because there was a Masechet Megillah, so he borrowed that phrasing. While Hanukkah he calls after the name of the holiday, as opposed to, I don't know, Hilchot, Habakat Neirot or something along those lines. And it's interesting. The laws of Hilchot Megillah and Hanukkah are found in the book called Sefer Zmanim. In the Rambam's 14-volume masterpiece, the Mishnah Torah. So he has a section called Hilchot Zmanim, right? The laws of the book of times, or maybe sacred times, or something along those lines. And much of that material is taken from what in the Mishnah is usually called Seder Moed. Moed is language of Moed, like the Ohel Moed or the Moadim. That refers to sort of appointed times, right? What we might call, primarily, Yom Tov, maybe Shabbat and Yom Tov. Zmanim sounds like a more expansive term, a catch-all, which would include, and this is indicated in other places that Maimonides references and explains, what the Sefer Zmanim is about. Sounds like it includes Moadim, includes the laws of Shabbat and Yom Tov, but also other times. And perhaps that could be explained by understanding that, in a sense, it's a question whether or not Purim and Chanukah, which are our topic today of Hanukkah, are they holidays proper? Is it actually a Yom Tov? Or are they a Yantiv proper? Or something a little bit different? And there's some discussion about that. I should note at this point that during our brief time together, I meant this to be reflections on Hilchot Hanukkah. We can't do a full comprehensive discussion of all of it, of course, in the time allotted today. But I encourage people over the course of Hanukkah to maybe incorporate some study of Rambam into the 8 days. Certainly, that would be an appropriate way to be kovea itim laTorah, to learn Torah, make time for Torah during these days. But there are features which we won't discuss, at least not in detail, during our time today. So again, these halachot Megillah and Chanukah are found in Sefer Zmanim at the very end. At the very end of Sefer Zmanim, Sefer Zmanim begins with the laws of Shabbat, and then Hilchot Shabbat, and then moves its way through the laws of Eruvin, and then the laws of what we call Yom HaKippurim. He calls Hilchot Shvitat Asor, which is again not for now. Shvitat Yom Tov, etc. Hilchot Chametz Umatzah, referring to Passover. Hilchot Shofar, Lulav, Sukkah, etc. And then laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctification of the new moon, fast days, and then at the very, very end, he gets to the laws of Megillah and Hanukkah. Again, in the Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, you'd find most of this material in Masechet Shabbat. Okay. In Maimonides' reordering and in his construction, you'll find it not as part of Hilchot Shabbat, but rather at the end of Sefer Zmanim as its own entity. So that's one chidush of the Rambam, to give Hilchot Hanukkah its own space, its own import. He does, I should note though, he does give a nod back to perhaps the original context of Shabbat, and certainly at the beginning of Sefer Zmanim. At the very end of Hilchot Hanukkah, he discusses the relative priority of Hanukkah candles and Shabbat candles, and in doing so, amongst other reasons for putting that halacha there, he gives a nod back to perhaps the original context of Hilchot Shabbat as the sort of the framing for Hilchot Hanukkah, and the sort of juxtaposition and conversation between the candle lighting, the Shabbat candle lighting, and the Hanukkah candles. It also, as sort of an envelope structure, returns back to the beginning of Sefer Zmanim, right? As one of the commentators puts it, he enters with regards to Shabbat, Nichnas b'Shvita, and then he exits in terms of the candle lighting of the Hanukkah candles. So that's like the broader structure. Now, what do we make of the fact that Rambam created this thing called Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah? And again, during our time today, I want to talk about some of the broader structural features, and then a bit about his description at the beginning of Hilchot Hanukkah of what we're actually celebrating here. If the Talmud puts it, my Hanukkah, what is this all about? So the fact that he puts Hanukkah and Megillah together, and he creates this thing called Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah, is very interesting. And there's two things about that are interesting to me. One is the fact that he puts them together. What do we make of the fact that he puts them together into one halacha, not two separate halachot, two separate things, one halacha? Secondly, it's interesting that he calls it Megillah v'Chanukah as opposed to, for example, Chanukah v'Megillah. And just as a point of contrast, if you would open up the Shulchan Aruch, which to a large degree borrows from Maimonides, but also is its own thing, and borrows from other sources as well. So there you'll find that in Orach Chaim there, you'll have in the section of having to do with daily life and Shabbat and also the holidays. So there you'll find that you have the laws of, for example, Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur, Sukkah, and then you get to Chanukah and then Purim. Not Purim, then Chanukah, Chanukah, then Purim. Now, the ordering the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim, is perfectly sensible because it's proceeding, Orach Chaim is proceeding along, sort of the day-to-day. It actually begins with one's morning, the day-to-day, and the weekly schedule and the calendrical cycle. And Hanukkah, if you start in Tishrei, then Hanukkah, precedes Purim calendrically. So it makes sense that Hilchot Hanukkah would precede Hilchot Megillah. But, in contrast, though, why does the Rambam start with Megillah and only then get to Hanukkah? Why Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah and not Hanukkah Megillah? All things being equal, why not put Hanukkah first? Let me just pause here. If anyone has any suggestions, what do you think?
He's doing it historically.
Okay, so Ruth, good to see you, Ruth, as always. So Ruth suggests one option is that he's organizing it historically, right? Because the occurrence, the historical occurrence, which Purim marks and celebrates, preceded, right, from the Persian period, and precedes the occurrence of the Hanukkah, miracle and such. Neva writes in the chat, because the priority the Gemara gave to Megillah. What do you mean? If you can unmute for a second, I'm looking for your picture here.
Just that the Gemara gave so much relative attention to Purim, but didn't give as much attention to Hanukkah. So this is sort of his chidush. So he's adding it to the way the Gemara is viewing it. I mean, that was one thought I had.
Terrific. It's a great thought. Thank you for sharing it. Okay, so Never suggests that it's, instead of or in complement to the idea that one precedes the other historically, that one precedes the other textually, meaning that or takes priority because the Gemara already and the Mishnah before it has the Masechet Megillah and gives it much, sort of attention front and center, while Hanukkah, as we said before, is, redacted within other conversations. There's no Masechet Hanukkah. Now, we would then ask, sort of regress the question, why is it that the Mishnah does that, right? Why does the Talmud do that? Why is it exactly that it doesn't? And I want to focus here on Maimonides. I don't think it's too far afield. There is conversation about that. Why would perhaps the Mishnah have given less attention, given sort of scant attention to Hanukkah per se? Why does the Talmud, give it more attention, but again, not fully in its own right? Okay, but Maimonides maybe is building off of that. That's terrific. Any other ideas?
Well, one more, and it's in the same vein. The Megillat Esther, the Purim story, is in Ketuvim, but the sages never allowed the Hanukkah story, into Ketuvim. So the Maccabees, the books of Maccabee are outside. And so that may be a factor.
Okay, terrific. So we have three options, it seems like, on the table. One is historical, that Purim came, Megillah came before Hanukkah, if you will, historically. Two is that Megillah received relatively more attention, much more attention, right, in rabbinic literature than Hanukkah. right? Certainly before Maimonides hit the scene, okay, and was mechadesh and redeemed Hanukkah. But nonetheless, Megillah, then Hanukkah, and then 3 that was Neva, and then Ruth's second suggestion, which is our third option here, right, is that if you think textually, right, in terms of the canon. So already before the Mishnah and Talmud in the Bible, there is of course, Megillat Esther, while Maccabim or something like this is certainly not included in the Book of Maccabees is not included in the Tanakh. It wasn't canonized as such. Megillah, right, gets priority. Megillah is already scriptural. So these are all, I think, very, 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 quite plausible. Let me add a.
Also, is it possible that the Talmud looked down on the part of the Hashmonaim wanting some greater malchut, or just that war is not so much considered a miracle in and of itself? It was a need at the time.
Okay, great. So these are also possibilities as to why the Mishnah might have wanted to. It's a theory. This is what you're articulating are 2 theories as to why the Mishnah might have been, less than enthused or fully enthused about Hanukkah, and may have therefore only addressed it parenthetically. One, the Maccabees, who were priests, took on the throne, the kingship, which is really reserved, at least ideally, and according to Maimonides, certainly so, for the descendants of Judah, Lo Yasur Shevet Yehuda, and or alternatively some sort of ambivalence, let's call it, about the militarism associated with Hanukkah. Okay, these are the theories that people put around. Thank you.
Also, isn't there one more thing that all of our holidays are unique holidays, and in its essence, the original Hanukkah with the rededication of the temple, weren't they for 8 days like trying to reenact a delayed Sukkot? That it was actually the days of Sukkot. It wasn't supposed to be its own thing, but a reenactment that, it took them that long to get there. And so they could celebrate Sukkot, but it was later. And, afterwards they made it a holiday. But initially it was a delayed observance.
Right. So this is also right. This is also there's a famous question: why is Hanukkah 8 days and not 7 days? If really the oil was supposed to last 1 day, right? So it should have lasted, So then the first day was just a totally natural phenomenon that it lasted that first day. Well, it's not really worthy of celebration per se if you're thinking about, counting up miracles. So one of the understandings, and I believe this is also influenced by the Book of Maccabees, is that they were reenacting or sort of doing a sukkah type celebration. Delayed. Better late than never. And in that sense, if I'm understanding me correctly, the idea is that Purim, in a sense, is something up over Hanukkah, right? Which is that Hanukkah would be based on or derivative of another holiday in some sense, while Purim would be sort of, de novo, its own creation. She's nodding, so I think that I'm understanding what you're saying. So these are all excellent suggestions. I want to offer another suggestion in the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik, or Joseph Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik suggested that, and this actually, Amy, is kind of the reverse of the way you're thinking, which is not to at all to criticize your idea, just to add another idea. He suggested that yes, there was the historical order, and there's also the scriptural order, but thirdly, there's kind of a conceptual point here, right? This would be sort of characteristic of his way of thinking, right? To privy the conceptual certainly over the historical or the literary, which is to say, Rabbi Soloveitchik wanted to argue that Purim provides the conceptual kind of source or precedent or legitimization, the source of the legitimacy of the holiday of Hanukkah. Because the truth is, right, from whence did the rabbis or the tradition get the notion that they could create their own holiday? We understand the biblical holidays, Pesach and Shavuot and Sukkot, etc. But where do we get this idea that we have the authorization, legitimacy, and we're going to discover that perhaps actually there is a biblical basis or some sort of necessity to do this? But it's right. But where does this come from? We'll note, by the way, that when this is actually that the Rambam groups Megillah and Hanukkah together in the beginning of the halachot and the koteret, as they call it, like the opening. So he says this section of holidays, right? This section of halachot, excuse me, has two mitzvot in it, two positive mitzvot, midivrei sofrim, from the words of the scribes, and they are not from the counting, meaning that they're not part of the 613. Okay, and here he's interlocutor. He's talking to some of the Gaonim who would have counted these famously counted these part of 613, and he takes issue with that. Whatever he means by the words of the scribes, divrei sofrim, that's a lot of literature about that, but something clearly which is not of sort of like the first tier biblical 613 mitzvot. It's something less than that. What exactly it is, there's quite a lot of conversation about that, but something a bit less than that. So if they're from divrei sofrim, from whence the authority, right, to establish them? And certainly, right, Hanukkah, where's its authority from? So the claim is that from Maimonides, the authority to establish Hanukkah, like the legitimacy or the precedent for establishing this holiday, which we're about to celebrate, called Hanukkah, is from another holiday which we call Purim. That the institution of Purim, which yes is sort of biblically mandated or biblically narrated, and it's clearly already right. Clearly, the Mishnah takes quite embraces that notion, stands behind and sort of gives the nod to establishing the later holiday, which we call Hanukkah. Now, Purim itself, you should know, or I'll remind you, it itself requires legitimization, right? So, and requires a basis. And how exactly did we establish Purim? Midivrei sofrim, midirabanan, which though it's not a deoraita holiday, and the Talmud discusses this itself explicitly. The Talmud let me just pull it up over here. The Talmud where is this? What source did I put this on? The source, excuse me. Sources 8 and 11. Yes. Okay, right. So the Talmud says, where do we get, in source number 11, where do we get the authority, right? So the rabbis to establish the holiday of Purim, right? After all, the prophets are not supposed to add to the Torah, my drush. So one of the options there is a kal v'chomer, umame avdut lecherut amrinan shira. If we say shira, we recite the Hallel, okay, and we, more broadly celebrate the redemption from slavery to freedom, then mimita l'chaim l'kol shekain, would we not, kal v'chomer, would we not all the more so celebrate and mark the being saved from death to life, as Purim was, the Jewish people facing the threat of extermination physically, and were saved. So all the more so we should establish. So the point is there that the Gemara feels the need to legitimize the institution of Purim, and perhaps the Rambam put Megillah Hanukkah after Megillah, as if to stress the point that first you have Megillah, and then that gets you to thinking about to establishing Hanukkah. And the truth is, if you look at the laws of Megillah and then Hanukkah inside, and I provided them at length for you in your source sheets to consult, you'll see that he, after discussing in the first two chapters the laws of Purim, he starts to discuss the laws of Hanukkah, and several times there he references the precedent of Purim. So, for example, in chapter 3, halacha 3, he says that the rabbis established Hanukkah, and these days are called Hanukkah, forbidden to eulogize or fast them, kimei hapurim, just like Purim. Lighting candles them is a mitzvah midivrei sofrim, a mitzvah on the level of the scribes, kikriyat Megillah, just like the Megillah. The next halacha, number 4, daled, kol shechayav b'kriyat Megillah, chayav b'hadlakas ner Hanukkah. Whoever is chayav, obligated in the reciting the Megillah, is obligated in lighting the candles, etc. So you could argue, as Rabbi Soloveitchik argued, that the Rambam is continuously stressing that Hanukkah follows the pattern of Purim, follows the parameters of Purim, because Hanukkah actually relies on Purim for its very legitimacy. Okay. Now, now, this actually perhaps allows us to segue into reading the text of Hilchot Chanukah proper, because in, again, chapter 3 of Hilchot Chanukah, Halacha Aleph, this is on page 3 of your source sheets, the Rambam does something kind of rare, right, or aberrant for the Rambam, for how he speaks in the Mishnah Torah. He narrates the history or the story of Hanukkah, and perhaps during our remaining time, we'll have time to look more closely into how he narrates it. But the very fact that he narrates it is of great interest. He says there that during the time of the Second Temple, right? So we're during that time period, the time notably, right, post biblical period, right, the time which is post prophetic, the time essentially the beginning of the sages. During that time, when the Greeks were ruling, and they decreed these decrees on Israel, Gazru Gezerot Israel, Uvitlu datam, and they nullified their religion. Uvitlu datam, batel, I'll come back to that term, batel, or that root. And they didn't allow them to engage in Torah mitzvot, and they did all sorts of injustices and violations of the people's money, of their daughters. They and broke into the temple and breached breaches. Bitsar lehem Yisrael ma'od mipneihem, and Israel was very aggrieved and troubled because of them, very ma'od. Ulechatzum lachatz gadol, and they oppressed them greatly until God had mercy upon them and saved them, and the house of the Chashmonaim arose, and the kingdom returned to Israel for 200 years. And what I point out is that in this language here of the Malchut, which is Sar Lehem Yisrael Ma'od, and the Lachat especially, this point I owe to Michael Rosenzweig. The Lachatz, the pressure that they press them until God had mercy to save them. It sounds a lot. Forget Purim for a second. It sounds a lot like Passover, like the Uber salvation, right, of Passover. And it's, as such, you see that Hanukkah is, emerging out of the backdrop in his framing of not only Purim and the salvation of Purim, right, but also of Pesach itself, which is influencing his understanding of Hanukkah. And Rosenzweig actually points out something else additionally, which I haven't seen other people note, which is that this language of uvitlu datam, of nullifying their religion, right, is very evocative. And it's very evocative because in source number 3 on your source sheets, in the laws of the foundations of the Torah, Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Maimonides is discussing the obligation, the parameters, and the exceptions to the parameters of martyrdom in the face of people who would sort of compel one or community to violate the Torah. So one of the clauses there is that whenever it's during a time of gezerah, a time of decree, foreign decree against the people of Israel, or specifically against their dat, especially against the Torah, b'shat hagezerah, when a king, melech rasha, an evil king, right, would arise and decree something against Israel, levatel datam. Again, that's the same exact phraseology. To be mevatel, to nullify their religion. So then the commandment of martyrdom kicks in. And my point here is not to speak about martyrdom per se, as much as to note, and this is Rosenzweig's insight, not my own, that Maimonides here in the discussion of Hanukkah, it seems very clear that his casting Hanukkah is just such an occurrence. That what was at stake is nothing less than like the ultimate challenge to the continuation of Torah, the continuation of the entire culture, facing the prospect of bittul, facing the prospect of nullification of the end of Torah, and that's what's happening here when he describes in Hilchot Hanukkah, when he's talking here about the Greeks who arose to be mevatel datam. So those are the stakes that the people are facing, and you understand that partly what's motivating him, I think, in casting Hanukkah in the light not only of Purim but also of Pesach and also of Shat HaShemad, also in sort of when the stakes are at their highest, is in some sense explaining why is it that Hanukkah is so significant? Why does it deserve its own Hilchot Hanukkah? But why does it deserve being marked, commemorated, celebrated forever on? And I want to note on a kind of something interesting on a literary textual level, that this root bet tet lamed batel appears constantly. Maybe constantly is overstating it, but it appears several times in important places in Hilchot, not only Hanukkah, Hilchot Megillah v'Hanukkah. Because Hilchot Megillah, and this is why it's partly why I gave you this whole thing on your source sheets, begins, so it's on page 3 if you're following along inside, but I'll read it outside also. He starts, Kriyat Megillah bezmana mitzvah taseh midivrei sofrim. It's a positive mitzvah from the words of the scribes, as we said, and he describes it, who's obligated. And even the priests, ba'avodatan, even the priests, we'll come here about the priests at the end of Hilchot Hanukkah, right? Because the Hashmonaim were priests. Even the priests, mevatlin avodatan, they stop, they're mevatel, they pause, they leave, they neglect sort of their service and come to hear Mikra Megillah, come to hear the Megillah being read. And you're also, not only that, you're mevatel Talmud Torah. We also neglect, or we also stop learning Talmud Torah in order to go hear Mikra Megillah. Right? There's a sense that Mikra Megillah, that reading the Megillah, right, he's stressing here, is something which is mevatel other things. It's not it nullifies, it supersedes to the extent of causing relative or sort of temporary neglect of those other mitzvot. And this is actually not from him, obviously. This is from he's drawing here from the Talmud. And if you do a search, which I did a little while ago, of within Masechah Megillah, which I can't show you right now, but just do a search, you'll see that the root batel, levatel, and all this context comes up constantly. It does come up constantly in Masechah Megillah. You get the sense that Masechah Megillah and the Talmud, on one level, is kind of a meditation on the notion of nullification, of bitul, that which is nullified, that which is not nullified, what gets nullified and what does the nullifying, and that gets picked up here in the beginning of Hilchot Megillah, and in sort of an envelope structure, that's how he just chooses to end Hilchot Megillah. Because there, I gave it to you right over there. It's halacha 18. It's a celebrated passage. He says that at the end of days, in the times of the Messiah, the times of Mashiach, all the books of the prophets and all of the writings, kol sefer nevi'im v'chol tuvim, atidin libatel, will be, again, that same root, will be nullified. They'll all be nullified.
Dr. Kelsen, are you referring to nullified by the Talmud? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'll explain in a second.
Okay.
But atidin libatel, except for Megillat Esther. Except for Megillat Esther, that will remain like the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and also like the Halachot Shel Torah Sheba'al Peh, also like all the laws of the oral law, which will never be nullified. Okay? Even though the memory of all of the troubles of Israel, Zichron Hatzarat, Yivuta will be nullified, but the days themselves will never be nullified. And what does he mean here exactly? There's some conversation what he means here exactly. Let's take it the way some read it. What he means to say is that the recitation, the liturgical recitation, this is how the Ra'avad might have it, or at least how he understands the text that the Rambam is based on, the liturgical recitation of all the prophets, I give a Haftarah Shir, right? So all of those things will be gone, right? All the prophetic recitations, all of the writing, all the Megillot, it'll all stop being read. Not that they'll be taken out of the canon, but they'll all stop being celebrated liturgically, read publicly as part of our rite, except for Mikra Megillah. But for my point here is that you look how he chooses to end with the reference to Bittul, just like he chooses to begin. And the reason I'm harping on this, I know it's not Erev Purim, it's Erev Hanukkah, is because this is how he chooses to begin Hilchot Hanukkah as well. I'll repeat what I just recited, what I just read to you earlier from the chapter 3. In the days of Bayit Sheni, during the time of the Second Temple, when the Greeks, were in charge, and they decreed these decrees in Israel, ubitzlu datam, bittul, and they tried, or they did, nullify their religion, their dat, and didn't allow them to do what they did until Israel was saved. So the point is, what I'm trying to claim is that it's actually very interesting that Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah, I said this about before, but Masechah Megillah, but let me talk now about the Maimonides. Maimonides is choosing to link Hilchot Chanukah, Hilchot Megillah through the key root of Levatel, of Bet Tet Lamed. And I don't believe it's coincidental at all. I believe that essentially, or at least I would claim essentially, that what he's pointing out is that the great threat which these holidays, recall, and which faced the Jewish people, was one of nullification, physical nullification, spiritual nullification. It wasn't so much the creation of the story that belongs to the biblical period, but the question, Megillah isn't the biblical period, but that belongs to the earliest, the earliest layers of the biblical period, and certainly the sort of the Deoraita, holidays, Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuot, add Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur as well. Right? Those belong to the formation of the story. But once we receive the story, we receive the Torah, then the question is, can we continue it forward successfully? Right? Will it stay with us? Right? Will we be able to survive with it and carry it forward? And we face challenges in that regard. Purim marks one particular challenge. Hanukkah marks another challenge. And the attempt was levatel, nothing less than levatel datam. And the salvation was actually, no, lo yivatlu la'olam. The salvation is that marked by and expressed by the notion that actually, no, the Megillah will remain forever, right? And the attempt to levatel the religion of Hanukkah will have failed. And when you face those kind of existential threats, then first one faces a threat, but that it also opens one up to be asking, so at the end of the day, what are my core values and priorities, right? When you face that sort of existential question, you sort of return to yourself, and in that respect, we basically have decided that not only will Purim not be batel, but Purim is mivatel. In other words, Purim trumps, right? Purim nullifies other things, right? Purim, the commemoration of this holiday of facing the prospect of being nullified, is actually expressed by in this sort of very sort of inverse relationship of now Purim nullifies other things. Okay, so this is, I think, basically what to explain literarily, but also conceptually, if you will, what is connecting Hilchot Megillah into Hilchot Chanukah through the keyword of Bet Tet Lamed, the key root of bittul, right? That which is nullified, and that which will never be nullified. And this actually, I think might lead us to understand another very surprising feature of Hilchot Chanukah, Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah. Because as we said, these two halachot are, as the Rambam says, divrei sofrim. That's how we understand them. Right? Something. I would call it something belonging to the rabbinic realm. Whether or not all divrei sofrim are actually rabbinic per se, I'll leave it alone. But these two belong to the world of the rabbis, the rabbinic tradition, the rabbinic Misoram period, more so than the strictly biblical. And it's interesting that he includes in the laws of Hanukkah specifically, what's really another kind of mitzvah. He doesn't count as his own mitzvah here, and that's the mitzvah, the laws of Hallel. It's interesting. So if you wanted to look in Maimonides for the laws of Hallel, well, you didn't know where to find them, and you open Mishnah Torah, where would you look to find them? If it was me and I didn't know about that any better, I think the first place I'd look would be the laws of tefillah, probably. The laws of prayer, maybe the sections about reciting the Torah and the prophets or such. That's where I would think to, one of those places to look. But I would think Hallel is a form of prayer primarily, right? It's not there at all. And then I would think maybe, in the book of Zmanim already, okay, so what is Hallel? Well, Hallel is, a feature of our holiday celebrations. So I would look in the laws of Yom Tov. I would think maybe, but the laws are not there. He actually defers, the Rambam does, the laws of Hallel all the way to the end of this book called Sefer Zmanim, and all the way right the end of it, specifically within the section dealing with laws midivrei sofrim, from the words of the words of the scribe. Now he actually says explicitly in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah that unlike some of the Gaonim, he believes that it's very important to understand Megillah, Purim, and Hanukkah, and Hallel also. These are all the recitation thereof are all midivrei sofrim. Obviously, the text of Hallel is from Tehillim, but the notion that we recite it liturgically, right, and that there's a mitzvah to do so, and make a bracha even often to do so. So that he takes to be as being midivrei sofrim. Interesting, by the way, that he didn't totally invent on his own. I don't think people usually note this, but if you look on Al-Falsi in the Rif on Masechet Shabbat, so he there, in the course of discussing or sort of summarizing the laws of Hanukkah, so he already there talks about Hallel, and he talks about Hallel not only with regards to Hanukkah, but with regards to other things as well, other days as well, and gets in some of the details about what you skip and you don't skip, and the brachot. And so the Al-Falsi already did this, and Maimonides is certainly, greatly indebted to the Rif, as he says explicitly. And so that's not totally surprising. But nonetheless, the fact that he puts in the middle of Hilchot Hanukkah is quite notable. And actually, the way he structures it in Hilchot Hanukkah is he has the laws of, he says, here's the story of Hanukkah and the notion that the brachot for lighting the candles, Hallel, and then how you light your candles. So he puts it right in the midst of discussing the candle lighting of Hanukkah, essentially, right in the middle of those. What is that about? So I think that one suggestion you can make, and again, Rabbi Soloveitchik and his other students of his have sort of developed this idea, but what seems to be going on here fundamentally is that if you look back at the way the Talmud describes, this is actually the first source on your source sheets, the way the Talmud describes my Hanukkah, what's Hanukkah about. So it tells the story of Hanukkah, the way that it tells it, right? During the time of the Greeks, that they came and they impurified or rendered impure all the oils in the temple. And then when the Maccabee kingdom sort of arose and defeated them, and they couldn't find any pure oil, they only, except for one, which had the seal of the high priest. So it's supposed to be only enough for one day. It actually lasted for 8 days. And the next year, Kiva'um va'asa'um, the next year they established and made these into Yamim Tovim, into holidays, and at least in some versions of the Talmud's text, holidays, B'Hallel u'V'Hoda'ah, days of Hallel and Hoda'ah, days of praise and thanks. And what seems to be happening here is that the Rambam understands that the core mitzvah, certainly of Hanukkah, perhaps of Megillah as well, the core mitzvah is to commemorate those occurrences, those historical occurrences, and to offer thanks and praise, to offer Hoda'ah and Hallel for those occurrences. And the way that you do that on Purim is primarily, Hilchot Megillah b'Chanukah. The way you do it on Purim is primarily by reciting the Megillah. Megillah is the expression of praise, as the Talmud says. The Megillah actually constitutes a kind of Hallel. Right? That's why we don't recite Hallel on Purim. We read the Megillah instead. Actually, there is one opinion of Meiri that if you don't recite the Megillah, then actually you would recite Hallel. Right? That fundamentally the mitzvah is to recite Hallel, but that's expressed or that is that's fulfilled on Purim by reciting the Megillah itself. He's a sort of a sole opinion, a lone wolf who thinks that actually if you can't recite the Megillah, then you would recite Hallel. Most don't think that, but any event, the point is that the Megillah is meant to constitute some form of praise, right? By recounting the miracle, Pirsum Hanes, recounting the miracle, you thank and give praise for that. And on Hanukkah, we do that in two ways, it seems. One, by reciting Hallel proper, the text of Hallel from Psalms, and two, by lighting the candles. But lighting the candles themselves seems to be of a piece. This at least is the argument, of a piece, right? It's basically another way of fulfilling the same fundamental charge of thanking, Hoda v'Hallel, right? Yemei Hallel v'Hoda, of thanking and giving praise to God for this. Thank you, Kayla. I see how much more time we have, right? Thanking and giving praise for the Hanukkah miracle, the Hanukkah event, through lighting the candles and through the Hallel itself. And I want just to note, just three more points, I think. One is, we have this custom already from an early text, Masechet Sofrim, from around the 8th century, for this text, this practice of reciting something alongside the Hanukkah candle lighting, before, during, or after, but called Hanero Talalu. Hanero Talalu, Anachnu Madlikin, right? So there's different texts exactly, right? But Al Hanisim Al Neflot, these candles, right, we're lighting for the miracles and for the Niflot, the great things and the salvation from the war. It sounds like the text actually of Al Hanisim, Yala Porkan, right? The Al Hanisim insertion. And what you did on those days at this time, and et cetera, et cetera. These are holy candles, not for our own use, just to see. Kedei lahodot ulahalel. That's the version that I know. Some say don't have the word lahalel, but the version that am I right? Lahodot ulahalel l'shimcha gadol al nisecha, etc. To give hodah and halel, to thanks and praise. And the point being that speech act of reciting Hanero Talalu along with the candle lighting essentially is inviting us to frame or teaching us to understand that what we're doing when we're lighting these candles is doing something kidei lahodot al-halel, something which is meant to effect or express thanks and praise. And I guess in summary, what I want to say that is that the idea that of the entire day being about Hallel, and one way of doing that is through the candle lighting. This is true, and another way of doing this is through reciting the text of the Hallel from Psalms. It makes a lot of sense that this would be expressed in a collection of halachot at the end of the Sefer Zmanim, right, where we talk basically about something along the lines of rabbinic mitzvot, because the rabbis are living in a world which is post-prophetic, right? It's a world that I believe we live in, right? In the post-prophetic world. And this is not the days of the ultimate salvations of Pesach, of Passover, etc. This is once a story has been formed, now can it continue? And it continues into a world in which we don't hear God's voice in that way, and the sea is not splitting. It's actually more what we call a world of a hidden God, right? Of hidden miracles, and that certainly is true of Purim, and it's true as well of Hanukkah, right? These are minor, minor miracles, if you will. I guess I won't get to right now exactly how the Maimonides seems to express the story of Hanukkah and give great priority towards the reinstitution of the Hasmonean kingship, as to say the institution of Hasmonean kingship and the reinstitution of Jewish sovereignty. But the point is that it's a different type of experience than Passover. And that's what Megillah and Hanukkah is really, really about, right? Within that world, there are these challenges. And the question is, will, in the face of those challenges and attempted bittul of our story and of our people, can we survive? In those cases, we did survive. And those stories will never be batel on their own. And I'll just close by noting that the Hallel text, right, from the book of Psalms, it's actually a very fitting way of, I think, of marking, especially not only the biblical mitzvot, the biblical holidays, and yes, it's recited on Passover and Shavuot and Sukkot and Shavuot, but maybe in a way, especially, I would say, or in one sense, especially with regards to these rabbinic holidays.
In addition to the Tehillim, it's also the B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim. You're going back to maybe at a time where they didn't do Haftarot. You're going back to the source of why we have that covenant, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to say exactly. I'll only build off of that, and I'll just close. Is that I think Rabbi Silber might be on. So Rabbi Silber has pointed out that in another context that the Hallel, there's sort of two parts of the Hallel, and what I want to note here is that Rose just mentioned. I think it was Rose. It's B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim, mentioning the redemption from Egypt, etc. Is parallel when we left Egypt and. But Mitzrayim, and the whole world was a flutter, right? And it's such grand gestures and everything. The hills are dancing and the sea is fleeing. And that's paralleled by Min HaMeitzar Karatiya, an individual psalmist, right, saying from the Meitzar, Milashon Mitzrayim, from the Meitzar I called out to God, and God saved me. And what I would want to say, I don't remember right now, Silver. I know you're sort of listening. If this is what you said, or I'm building off of it, this is what you meant. But I'll just say that in this context, that in a way is what Megillah and Hanukkah are about, isn't it? Which is to say that in our own experience, in a world where it's not the hills dancing and fleeing and the sea splitting, but in our own world, Min HaMeitzar, can we see our story in light of that story, right? Can we find the miraculous, right? Not only at the exit from Egypt, but also Min HaMeitzar, Ananiva Merchavya, in the openings which God opens in our own world in different ways, right? In the story of the Megillah, which you could read, if you so choose, without the King of Kings, or you can choose to read the Kingdom. The story of Hanukkah, the flickering lights which remained, flickering for multiple days, right? The military victory, the return to sovereignty, which we understood in human terms, but can you find in those? And by the way, which were temporary. And Kayla, I know I have to end in just a moment, but which were temporary and didn't continue forever. But within there, Min HaMeitzar, right? Hallel, can we? And that's part of what Hanukkah is inviting us to do, right? In the darkness of winter here, can we see that little flickering light, right? The more minor gestures, and say, this reminds me of B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim. Let me recite Hallel. Yemei Hallel, the Hoda'ah. Can I make a Yom Tov here? And that's why I would say the Hilchot Megillah Hanukkah, in some sense, it's all of a piece. It's all this collection of things of halachot about exactly that, right? About in our period, in our world, can we still praise? Can we still say Hallel? Can we still offer thanks? And of course we do. Okay, more to say. I have to next year. I'll have to do this for 2 hours, not 1 hour or 90 minutes. But we have another shir coming in just a moment, just a few minutes. So I need to sign off. But wishing everybody a Chanukah Sameach, Yemei Yamim Tovim, Yemei Hallel v'Hoda'ah, and I gave you the whole Rambam Hilchot Chanukah here, and these are good learnings to do over the course of the coming days. Okay, so thanks very much. I see that
the sources are superb.
Thank you.
All right.
Rabbi Laura Belinsky, my colleague, is just entering the room, so I encourage you to stay on and learn from her as well.
Take care. I hope to see you staying in for the next class.